Well, hello, everyone. My name is Emily Goodson, and I am delighted to welcome you to the Rethinkability Conference and to this wonderful panel about the impact of the current political and administrative climate on disability inclusion. I am joined by three fabulous thought leaders, colleagues, and friends here who are going to introduce themselves a little further here in a minute. But just to frame us up for this discussion, I want to share our objective for the session. So this session is really asking us to move past performative inclusion and into a space of reckoning, where we name the fact that many organizations are still places where disabled employees feel pressured to hide their identities, where accessibility is still an afterthought, and where disability is often equated with incapability. So our objective here is we recognize that that's happening. How do we move beyond that? And our three panelists here are experts in how we're doing that and how we've done that historically. So I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into some discussion about the historical context of where we've been, the current state of disability inclusion at work, and where we're headed. So with that, Jim, why don't I turn it to you first, my friend, and tell everyone who you are and what you're about.
Thank you, Emily. My name is Jim Lebret. My pronouns are he, him. My visual description is that I am a older white guy wearing a pair of glasses, and I've got long curly hair with a gray goatee. I've got this fabulous violet colored shirt that I'm really loving a lot, button down shirt. And behind me is a red wall with a whole bunch of different posters, including a poster from the documentary that I co directed with Nicole Noonan called Crip Camp. And that's perhaps how I am best known.
You
Agatha?
are handing it off to Agatha.
Agatha.
I figured it was me next somehow. Hi, I'm Agatha Agbenobi. As Emily said, my pronouns are she, her. I am a Black woman with black and brown and curly hair, wearing a black cardigan over a light blue shirt with burgundy leaflets all over it. I have a background, a predominantly white background with a plant on the left-hand corner and a TV screen on the right side. Depending on how you're viewing the screen, it could be the reverse. And then in terms of the work that I do, I am a fractional HR consultant and advisor, and I also do conflict management, coaching, and conflict mediation work.
Thank you. And Keely?
Hi everyone, my name is Keely Catwells. Pronouns are she, her. Visual description, I am a white woman with long blonde hair, and I am wearing a black jumper, as we say in England, sweater, as you say in America, and I have a blurred background. And I am the CEO and founder of Making Space. We're a talent and learning platform connecting disabled professionals with employment and free education. And we support companies with creating more accessible workspaces that work better for everyone. Prior to founding Making Space, I founded C Talent, which was a talent agency increasing disability representation within film, TV, and media, and representing disabled artists. And thrilled to be here and having this conversation.
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be with all of you. It's really an honor to be on this panel with, or to be moderating this discussion with you. So I'm Emily Goodson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with brown hair with blonde highlights. I'm wearing a olive green dress today. And I'm sitting in my living room in New York, and I have a gorgeous painting behind me of a woman, and then some plants in the background as well. I should have put my book in the background, Jim. Now that with your Crip Camp poster, I'm like, where is I'm an author and a speaker. So I do have a book called Dating Disability, which is about at the intersection of dating and disability and building confidence in dating as a woman with a physical disability. I'm also a speaker and a former HR leader. So thrilled to be moderating this conversation today. And I thought what we would do to kick things off, it is really just set the foundation of how each of you define disability. And, I think also kind of set the foundation of what nuances we should consider, our audience should consider, as they move through this conference and as they listen to this discussion, what are the different nuances to the disabled experience that are important to consider? So Keely, can you guide us here and just kick us off? And then I'll allow the others to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my definition of disability has really evolved as my own experience with disability has evolved. But today, I really look at disability through the social model of disability, which really flips the old narrative around disability on its head, and it really changes the narrative that we are disabled by our medical conditions to actually we are disabled by the inaccessible world that we live in, whether that be communication barriers, physical barriers, sensory barriers, attitudinal barriers. And it really says what is wrong with the world and the systems and the spaces and the attitudes around us, not what is quote unquote wrong with the person. So that is, I think, what disability is to me and being disabled means to me, which is also why I use the language and the term disabled person instead of people with disabilities, really using that social model language. But I've also come to realize just how broad disability is. I think as someone who has a dynamic and fluctuating disability, and some days it can be invisible, other days I use a mobility aid and it can be visible. I often thought disability was something very visual, very obvious, but it's so broad. I think media kind of had this way of teaching us that disability was one thing and it was stereotypes and it was really narrowly defined, but it's not. And I think there are a lot of people who may feel like they might be not quote unquote disabled enough, but that is absolutely not true. And disability is everything from neurodivergence to those who are chronically ill, to those who are temporarily disabled, to those who have physical disabilities and beyond. So it's incredibly broad and for me defined by the social model of disability.
Fabulous. Jim, Agatha, anything to add?
Well, if I jump in, Agatha, I just want to echo some things that Keely has said here, which is I think it's a very broad definition, and and I'm a co-founder of two nonprofit organizations that support people with disabilities in the entertainment industry. And at Forward Doc, the one that's involved with documentary filmmakers, we spent a lot of time kind of really thinking about what our definition is of disability. And indeed, one can go beyond the basic idea of, well, if there's something about your body that impacts your daily living in some factor, yes, but the focus really should be, I think, on not what's wrong with you, but what's right with you.
Mhm.
And the fact that first off, we're all different, right? And we all and literally things around disability that are so common to people that don't even consider themselves disabled are true. That we do have burnout, there is a certain amount of anxiety at work, and sometimes that anxiety is based on disability. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, who's going to pick up my kid at school today? So, it definitely, if you identify as a person with a disability, you don't need to prove it to me. I believe you.
Yeah, I'm really going to echo a lot of what Keely and Jim have said in terms of that social model of disability. That disability is not so much about something being wrong with the person, but something being wrong with the world, where how people show up innately is somehow creating systemic barriers for them. Um, the other thing I want to also mention too is that disability can be very fluid. Anyone can be disabled at any time. I think the historical model of disability is that disability is a very fixed and very apparent model or condition, quote unquote. And rather, it is something that is very fluid. It can be visible, it can be invisible. Someone can be disabled for a short period of time in their life and suddenly need different sorts of supports and accommodations in the workplace or in just their daily life. Um, Not be disabled and then be disabled again. And then there are folks who live with ongoing conditions for which there are not yet solutions. And so unfortunately, the world that we live in focuses so much on what's wrong with the person instead of thinking about what's wrong with the systems of our society, of the workplace, that's allowing this person not to be able to have equal access to all that is required to have a full and fulfilling life. So that's how I would also define disability too, that it is definitely on a spectrum. It can be a bit complex and nuanced. Um, and there are just many different ways that someone can find themselves unable to access just all of the things that seem equally accessible for quote unquote neurotypical able-bodied individuals.
I just want to just add to this, if I might, that I really think that, for lack of a better term, the burden of having an unapparent disability is just as tough as having an obvious one. Like, I'm a wheelchair user. Yeah, it'll come up in the conversation that I can't walk. you know, it's just really obvious there. But that I think that if we think about our audience here and who you're dealing with, um, one should. I think that one just needs to be sensitive in regards to employees or people that you're going to hire about a couple of things, which is, if a person got to your door, they probably have done a great deal of work to get there, and that's real proof of their ability to be a really excellent employee. Uh, and I just think that, gee, you don't look disabled doesn't doesn't mean jack diddly. What it does mean, if somebody asks for something, they're not being lazy, they're not being like, I want something special. It means that they want to do their job and they know what they need to do. They know how to handle their disability, and that what they're asking you for is, I really would never question someone saying that I need this or I need that. I could go on for an hour, so I'm going to just stop right there.
I would add to that very quickly too. I think that was really well said. The other thing I think that we've noticed is there was some data that came out, I think was maybe a couple of years ago, that 90% of disabled employees don't disclose their disabilities at work, which is such a huge number. And we've seen through our work at Making Space, we do a lot of training within companies, and we've seen that we'll do a survey before and we'll do a survey after, and we'll see the stats of people who disclose after the training usually doubles on average, which is so wild. So I think it really goes to show that when companies do, I think, clearly define what disability does mean, because so many people don't even know that they're disabled. So if companies do say, yes, we abide by the social model, we recognize that if people are granted access requirements and accommodations, that they can do better work, that when they really frame disability in a specific way, it can make people feel safer and more comfortable. And I think we're going to talk about disclosure in a bit, but just wanted to bounce off what Jim said. But yeah, it's 90%, such a big number.
Yeah, it's astonishing. Yeah, we are going to talk about disclosure because I think it is such a huge component of this conversation. Is that, in this current political and administrative climate, people, at least from what I'm seeing in workplaces, are people historically have been afraid to disclose for a variety of reasons. And unfortunately, I think that is getting worse to some degree. And I want to take us, before we kind of talk about the current state of workplaces, I want to take us briefly back to our history, because I think, when we think about the workplace, all of us as employees or leaders carry everything into the workplace, right? Our personal lives, but also our history and any stress, trauma, misunderstanding around that. I think all of the panelists brought up the stories that we've been told around disability, or around inclusion, that the media sometimes has incorrectly fed us, stereotypes, so on and so forth. And so, Agatha, I wonder if you can kind of kick us off here talking about sort of the historical context and perhaps language that we've used historically, around disability and around inclusion, and kind of how that intersects with what we're seeing today.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone had told me in 2020 that we would see this backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion, I wouldn't have believed them. I would say no. It seems like a lot of companies are very genuine about their intentions, about including everyone in the workplace and making those systemic shifts to ensure that happens. And I'm speaking specifically about the United States here, so I want to make that very clear. I know that other countries are on slightly different paths and journeys right now as it relates to this topic. Um, but the shock has come from a lot of the disinformation and misinformation around DEI and woke and all of that has really allowed so much of the public to question and pull away from efforts that probably all of us on this panel think is common sense. And there's just more than enough scientific and historical data that supports the vitality of this work. And I can specifically call out even the term woke and how that word that how that word, sorry, how that word has been misinterpreted, whether purposefully or not. And folks aren't even aware of where that term originates from. It actually originates from a song by Ledbetter back in the 30s, from called the Scottsboro Boys, which is a case, if you know your history, about young African American boys being falsely accused of raping two white women in Scottsboro, Alabama. And woke really originates from this place of the Black community in America being very aware of the social ills and prejudices that a lot of people often miss and ignore. And that has found its way over time into different types of liberation movements, including movements for disabled persons in the U.S. And it's really such a travesty, honestly, that folks aren't aware of. Really, the importance of language, understanding the historical and social context around language, and understanding the political motivations around the reformation of language as well. This is not something that's new. It happens all the time in different countries where political figures or social figures will take a term that is meant to liberate people and reuse it for their own gain in the wrong direction. So we're in the same fight, but it just looks a little bit different this year and probably in the next few years to come. But I think it's really important that those of us who do care about supporting and uplifting all people in the workplace or in society, more broadly speaking, that we take the time to check our sources, to reacquaint ourselves with the history of different groups of people or communities before we jump on a bandwagon motivated by emotional distress or whatnot and political agendas.
100%. And Jim, I'm wondering if you can chime in here too about, the historical fight for disability rights, because I think, to Agatha's point, I find that that is a piece of history that is often not taught or that people aren't as familiar with. And I think that historical fight is something that we're still fighting and perhaps going back and reliving the fight. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Sure, I find it incredibly ironic that I think that in the last 3 or 4 years, the disabled community's been asking people to add the A for access at the end of DEI. And that often it looked very performative. Like corporations will, if you look at their diversity statement, they'll include disability as one of those groups that they support. There's nothing else in that report showing anything around disability. And so here we are, where I think we really made some good strides. And and then all of a sudden, no, you can't use the word disabled in your grant applications, or diversity in your grant applications. And people are getting their science grants rejected simply because it was about the diversity of frogs in a pond somewhere in Colorado. It which is absurd, and I don't think we need to waste time even talking about why that is so absurd. But historically, I think that the fight has been to not look upon us purely as a medical problem or what's wrong with you, but that it's a human right, that it's a civil right. And if we go back and look at the sit-in, the 26-day sit-in of Judy Heumann and a bunch of other activists in San Francisco in 1977 to get the HEW 504 regulations signed, that was really like a line in the sand. That was just saying we can't go back at this point. We had this nationwide demonstration, and now here we are, and we decided we're going to take over this building, and we have support from other communities. And it's a wonderful story, but that in the long run, and I think this is why this work is so traumatic at times, you're trying to prove to people that you matter. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from people with disabilities being beggars because they were never hired. The word handicapped comes from cap in hand, basically out there, asking for, begging for money. And so the fight has been historically around our human rights, our civil rights, but also changing how we are represented in media. And so we needed HEW 504, which said that if you get federal money, you cannot discriminate against the disabled, which led to the Americans with Disabilities Act. No one was going to give this stuff to us. It is something that had to be codified as a civil right. In this day and age right now, it's very, very scary, because one of the first things that happened when the new administration came in is they removed the ASL interpreters from press briefings. And look, the list is incredibly long, and literally just about every day there's something that is just shocking that's going on, like firing all the people who work in the education department that administer support for disabled students. And that is incredibly close to my heart right now. And that I've seen how this kind of support can make or break someone's life. And that kind of support allows disabled kids to have what everybody else wants in their life, which is a life of their own choosing, a life of their own direction, to be able to pursue what is happiness for themselves. And then beyond that, allowing us to be contributing members to society, however people want to quantify that. I don't want to quantify somebody's value to their productivity and their return on investment, or what is this going to cost versus anything. But it was very, very telling when the Secretary of Health, Kennedy, had a speech about autism. And he immediately starts off talking about people with autism, saying, these are people who will never pay taxes. These are people who will never play baseball or write a poem. Being absolutely so ignorant. And the fact they led with, they'll never pay taxes. So I think that I'd like to kind of stop by words here just by saying there's going to be many more things in here, and we've relied on the ADA. We've relied on the was the EEOC to help us with employment suits. We can't rely upon that at the moment. I don't believe. I don't. I don't think that there's no interest or will in government at the moment. But what that means is that companies, I believe, really need to look at what their ethos is, really what they believe, and and if you believe that people with disabilities are have been undervalued, and that there's a real value in really looking at that community in regards to who's part of your workforce, that it doesn't take a lot to educate yourself to really say, yes, there is data out there and there are stories out there. The fact of the matter is that if you haven't seen it, you don't necessarily believe it.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting for it to come in your door, go out and find it, because it is there in the positive documentaries and films that are out there. It is in the work that people like Keely or Agatha are doing. It is out there in your book, Emily, about dating while disabled. All of this is really just intertwined to say, if we're not part of your party, man, it's going to be kind of boring.
Be
Going to
real
believe it.
boring.
Oh
We
boy.
bring the fun.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
used to, you used to, I started off working in the theater many, many years ago. And it was like, it wasn't a good theater party if I hadn't fallen out of my wheelchair.
oh
You know what I mean? So
Jim.
this is what I'm talking about. I'll show you.
Um, yeah, and I think, Jim, you brought up so many pearls of wisdom there. And the one I want to hit on right now is, when you said it's really time for companies to take a deep look at themselves and figure out what their ethos is, what their values are, what their culture is, what they're standing for. And, Keely, I think you spoke to this earlier too, right? This idea of like, if I'm a company and I believe in disability inclusion, like how do I define that? And then how am I training people? Because I think to Jim's point, when we have stigma, a lot of that's coming from fear and miseducation and the unknown. So, Keely, pivoting us a little bit to the current state in the workplace, I'm wondering, kind of what you're seeing as common barriers to inclusion in the current workplace. And then maybe from there, we'll transition a little bit to now, what do we do about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think barriers that still exist are oftentimes for disabled job seekers, this constant prioritization of stamina over talent, especially for earlier stage roles. So it makes it very difficult for disabled people to get that initial job, that initial experience. And then if we look at the more kind of mid-career positions, you must have all of this experience. But how can we get that experience if we don't have access to those kind of earlier stage opportunities? So I think that's still a big barrier. Although I think with technology, as that evolves, that opens up the door to a lot of opportunity. I mean, we can't get out of bed without talking about AI, so I'm going to be the first one to mention it on this panel today. I will say, I think there is a lot of opportunity there because as disabled people, we've actually been at the forefront of using AI. If you think about predictive text, if you think about eye tracking software and technology, screen readers, alt text, often these are the foundation of what modern AI is built on today. So I think we can leverage that to our benefit. We can use that as a competitive advantage. We can talk about that in ways that sets us apart from other people in the application process. And I think the other opportunity with the AI is we're seeing companies There was another study recently, and it was saying that employers would rather hire 70% of employers would rather hire people who have expertise and even basic skills in AI than people who wouldn't. So if we can get disabled people access to accessible AI education and training, we can get people in those high wage, good jobs, quality opportunities that are also right now more likely to be the remote positions too. So I think there's the opportunity there. I think the other barrier that we've seen is weirdly, I had this love and hate relationship with the business case of disability. We have undeniable business case. I mean, I think we all know the stats. You know, companies that intentionally engage in disability inclusion, they achieve 28% higher revenue, double the net income, 30% higher profit margins. We are so much more loyal, both customers and employees, once we find an organization that does actually support disabled people. I think it's like 92% of customers are more likely to support a business that employs disabled people. I mean, undeniable business case. But going back to Jim's earlier point too, where is the human rights and civil rights perspective within all of this? We shouldn't have to continuously legitimize our presence in spaces based solely on that economic power. So I wrestle with that as well. So I think I went a little bit off topic, but those are my thoughts that came to mind with that question.
Can I add one thing? And I'm so excited. So Agatha, I don't want to jump all over the conversation, but I'm really excited here. Stamina, I just want to point, does not equal value. Simple as that. And I was on a Zoom call, about 6 months ago, and I think I was talking to a bunch of social workers or something. And I simply said that, and the chat lit up. So it wasn't just like this is only for people with disabilities. I think everybody feels that what you really want is somebody who is loyal to your business, who feels appreciated, who brings their creativity. And so I just really wanted to underline that. I think as a living in this, kind of, Elon Musk world where you got to sleep underneath your desk, bro, world, that's BS. I'm gonna leave it there.
100%. And Agatha, I think the other piece I see of this, so when we're thinking about current barriers and workplace realities, right? I think, we're bringing up great points about like this hustle culture that's dominated for so long. And also, just accessibility, like to the workplace, people being able to physically get to the workplace or get into a workplace. That's, a whole nother area we could explore. But I'm super passionate, as I know all of us are, about representation, both in the workplace and in media, so on and so forth. And Agatha, I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to representation from the perspective of disclosure and, how that all intersects in the workplace currently.
Yeah, it's really difficult for folks who have non-apparent disabilities to disclose that they are disabled throughout the entire employee life cycle. And rightly so in a way, right? It's because of our society and companies saying that, they have a culture of inclusion and belonging, but not necessarily walking the talk. And, in working with different companies and businesses on creating more inclusive and belonging workspaces for all types of people, including disabled and future employees and current employees. I've seen the spectrum. I've seen the spectrum of businesses who are really trying and making the effort and understand that sometimes it costs a little bit more, it gives a little bit more, it requires a little bit more time investment to begin to understand what these barriers are and to begin to actually dismantle them. For some, it's more of like a nice to do. And let me just share some quick stats here, like more than, or is it less than double of representation of non-disabled of disabled employees are in the workplace right now. I can share some other stats too as why folks feel this discomfort of really sharing is because they're aware that the barriers that are there. Even if a company says that they are inviting and welcoming and they've created all of these systems and all of that, it really is all about the employee feeling and seeing that over time, developing that trust. So you can say it and you can even have the systems, but it's all about the entire life cycle, right? So how you brought them on board, how you found them from the sourcing part of the recruitment, right? What did the interview process look like? Was there representation in terms of the hiring committee? Were folks asking the right questions, right? Instead of the typical stereotypical question of, let us know if you require any accommodations during this hiring process. There are better questions you can add. You can be asking your potential future employees than that. Conversations around the onboarding process. Jim mentioned something that is so vital. It's the language that we use around this work too, which is how do we begin to see different communities or approach the work of supporting different communities from this strengths-based perspective instead of trying to support inadequacies, right? So it's what are the strengths that these particular individuals are bringing to our workplace or work environment that we wouldn't otherwise have if we hadn't hired them. It's those promotion conversations. The other bit that's really interesting is there are recruiters who it's not just stamina, but they're hiring for potential. And there is this perspective that disabled persons are sort of in this like stagnant box where like they're always going to be the same. They can't grow. Like how we bring them in is how they'll always be. There is that false perception that we're fighting as well. So, and again, to Jim's point, potential does not equal value, uh, neither does stamina, right? It's the whole person that equals value and what they're able to bring to the workplace. So I can share some stats right now in terms of, what's probably keeping folks from wanting to share about their disability in any part of their life cycle as an employee. The unemployment rate for disabled Americans specifically remains roughly 7.5%, more than double that of non-disabled workers. The median earnings for disabled employees are 67% of non-disabled peers, same role, median wages, just due to occupational segregation and sometimes just the different ways that work is concentrated within the team. Only about 30% of employers have formal disability recruitment programs or disability support programs for the recruitment and promotion cycle. And many hospitality, retail, and manufacturing roles continue to remain inaccessible due to just the lack of accommodation planning and also the lack of the use of tech. Too much to Keely's point, there's a lot of tech out there that I know companies can make the budget for to create the space that is truly welcoming for all employees, including disabled persons. I honestly just think that, to your point, the business case is tired, but unfortunately, we live in this capitalistic society where we still have to bring that data out as well as the data of the civil rights and the human rights piece, right? We don't progress as a society if we continue to leave people behind. It's just not possible. Um, so I'll leave it there. I could go on and on, but there's so many ways to really begin to help people shift their mindsets around supporting disabled folks. It's looking at the entire employee's life cycle, looking at the communities in which they live and in which they're coming from when they come to us within businesses, and figuring out what we need to do to really transform the work environment to where it's not this thing of I always have to ask. I always have to ask. It's already there, so that I don't have to ask. I don't have to go through the potential guilt or shame for asking, or go through the so many barriers of trying to get your accommodations approved. It's just there. It exists. And so I hope we can eventually get there someday.
We all want to be able to enter a room and just do our job, and you find that in the entertainment business, it's like you should have an access coordinator. So an actor can simply come in and do their work, not have to figure out what they need to get on the set. It, and there's another point I'd really like to make. I think Agatha, you quoted about it, 7.5% of the unemployment rate. That, as I understand it, that is of people actively looking for work. Well, we lost Agatha there for a moment.
Hopefully we'll get her back.
Okay, well,
I'll work on that. But yeah, keep going
sure.
down this thread, Jim.
My understanding is that there are a lot of people who aren't looking for work because if they work, they're going to lose their benefits, or that it has simply been a constant brick wall. And so they feel like the opportunities just aren't there. So in reality, it is a much higher number of people with disabilities who want to work, who are unemployed. But we have to fix so many different things.
Yeah.
And some of that is simply the limits that people are under. In other words, you get a job, right? Great. You've had money through the support services to get your health care and stuff. And now you've got this job. Now you make too much money, but you don't qualify for health care yet. Now, I mean, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? So, anyway, that number to me was always like, I was so surprised when I realized that was only just people looking for work. What about the people who are prevented from looking for work because of how society is set up?
Absolutely. A raise of that asset limit is long overdue. I think it hasn't been updated since 1989,
Yeah.
which is wild. And I think the thing that we've been noticing too is there's a huge lack of knowledge around able accounts and how they can support individuals too. So I would definitely encourage anyone who may feel like they're in that situation to look into able accounts. Able accounts are essentially a tax advantage savings account for people to be able to save and still retain their benefits. And the eligibility is expanding come January 2026. So I know that I think it's been, you've had to have become disabled before the age of 29, but now that's expanding to before the age of 49, I believe. So I think it's like 8 million more people will be eligible. So definitely check out Able accounts and how they could potentially support you too. And I would love for employers to also encourage folks to be able to have able accounts and educate people and their employees on able. I think that would be such a phenomenal win if they could do that. Um, and the last thing to Jim's first point too, we're so passionate of making space about normalizing disabled people being experts in subjects beyond just disability and accessibility. So passionate about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Keely, one of the important points you bring up is educating people on benefits. And I've seen that be like a tremendous support in the workplace, right? As I find, I used to work in HR, and I found that a lot of times employees weren't educated on their literal health benefits or on what was available to them. And so, if they became disabled while they were working for you, they may not know how to sign up for the different benefits that can help them and support them. So I think, as we're kind of closing this panel today, in this discussion, and we could easily go on forever, but we do have a time limit. I'd really like to get into like some more practical things like that, that can help companies move inclusion efforts forward. So, so far we've touched on like educating your employees about benefits, combating misinformation. Agatha brought up, making your hiring panels diverse and having sourcing channels. But I'm wondering if we can kind of, as we wrap things up here, go around and each of you talk about like what are some practical things companies can do to move inclusion efforts forward. And Agatha, why don't I start with you, and then we'll go back around.
Yeah, I think a practical a move is asking the right questions, and also making sure you don't put everyone in a box, right? So as soon as an employee discloses to you that they are disabled or that, let's say, for example, they're autistic or they have ADHD, really sitting with that for a minute before moving into action. I know in a lot of spaces, especially in the tech space, there's a huge bias for action and moving pretty quickly. And a lot of times it really does matter to slow down, to speed up later in terms of understanding fully the person that's in front of you, what they're telling you, what has been the history of their work environments. So not just how they've come to you now today and how they've been on your team, but also understanding what their journey has been as a worker here or in the States or wherever they are. I think that's really important, is sitting with that, figuring out who they really are and asking some of the right questions, going beyond a lot of the generic stuff that we often hear. I think that's so important, not just to be able to get the right answers and move in the right direction, but also for them to also begin to feel like, wow, I feel like you actually see me. You've done a little bit of work, right? I'm not just another person coming to you with this.
Kaylee or Jim, want to jump in?
I can jump in. I would say a super tangible, kind of quick thing every employee can do is to just add to the bottom of their email every time they're sending a new document, a calendar invite, any kind of new something that they need to open if they're hosting an event, whatever it is, just add the line, "Do you have any access requirements?" And I think that can make the world of difference to people being able to fully participate.
It sends a message that this is important to the person that it and the company, and yeah, I see this parallel in the entertainment industry, and it's like we're getting all of these right now. I'm a member of a couple of the academies, and it's like you're getting these offers to come to screenings, live screenings of things and it's like there's no access information there. There's no way to find out the access information there. And in reality, it's like it's very, very simple just to put a line there saying, if you want information, contact this person, or this venue is wheelchair accessible, or something, because it sends a positive message.
Yeah. And I think, as we are wrapping this up and thinking about disability inclusion moving forward, what I'm hearing from all of you is that there is a lot of um, fear and anxiety because in the current kind of political and administrative climate. And a lot of people feel their rights may be taken away, rights that they have fought very hard for, or that their elders have fought for. And, now is really the time for companies, as all of us have said, to really define who you are and what your values are. And if disability inclusion is important to you, these are all things that you can take on, as Jim said, show you care about people, by asking the questions, by adding things to event forms or email signatures, by combating the misinformation. So thank you to all of you for bringing up, both like the historical context of where we've been, why the misunderstandings are present, but then also some very practical things companies can do or leaders can do to keep moving things forward if their organizations are aligned with that. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us today. I know if you're in the Slack channel, there's probably some amazing discussions going on, so keep that going on. And just really quickly as we close, if I could ask each panelist if you have a website or a social media handle where people can follow you, please share that because I know people are going to want to keep engaging. So we'll just go around the table here. So Keely, where can people find you?
I would first and foremost visit Making Space. So if you check out making-space.com, you can sign up for free if you are a job seeker. And you can also, if you're a small business, you can also sign up for free, get access to a limited amount of kind of job postings and educational courses. And if you're a corporation, contact us and we would love to get you started. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, just Keely Catwells. Thanks.
Amazing. Jim?
Um, you could go to jimlebrecht.com and you'll find and you can find a lot of good information there just kind of about what I do. And I find LinkedIn incredibly valuable. So, and I'm there, and um, someday I'll be really good at Instagram, but in the usual places, I'm Jim Lebrecht.
And everyone should watch Crip Camp if they haven't already.
That would be delightful.
What?
Netflix and YouTube.
Agatha?
Yeah, you can find me at Resonant HR, RESONANTHR.com, where you'll find that I work primarily with businesses in the tech space, healthcare, and professional services that are also government contractors. With a focus on compliance, employee relations, conflict management coaching, and conflict mediation, all with a DEIBA lens. And then I also do ethics, AI ethics consulting as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you to all of you for sharing your time with me and with our audience today. And with that, we wish everyone a happy rest of the conference. And I know there are going to be lots of great things for you all to learn and engage in. So thank you. And we all look forward to connecting with you in other ways.